Hello everyone, welcome to Sweat Talkies. I am Sihat Gameshri and my partner T. Ashrita. Our topic is Deadlock Avoidance Resource Allocation Graph. We have done this project under the guidance of Dr. M. Prasad Sir, Associate Professor, Department of CSE. Coming to our topic, Resource Allocation Graph, also known as RAG. A resource allocation graph shows which resource is held by which process and which process is waiting for a resource of a specific kind. It is amazing and straightforward tool. Resource allocation graph describe what the condition of the system as far as process and resource concerned, like what number of resources are allocated and what is the request of each process. Everything is represented in graph only. Benefit of having graph. It is conveyable to see a deadlock straightforward using RAG. Coming to types of vertices in RAG. Here, vertices are classified into two types. One is process vertex and another one is resource vertex. Here, resource vertex is furtherly classified into two types. One is single instance and another one is multi-instance. Process vertex. Every process will be represented as a process vertex. Generally, the process will be represented with the circle. Resource vertex. Every resource will be represented as a resource vertex. It is also two types. Single instance and multi-instance. Coming to single instance, it is represents a as a box. Inside the box, there will be a dot. So the number of dots indicate how many instances are present in each resource. Coming to multi-instance, it is also represents as a box. Inside the box, there will be many dots. Types of edges in RAG. Edges are classified into two types. Here, one is assign edge and another one is request edge. Assign edge. If you already assign a resource to a process, then it is called assign edge. Request edge. It means in the future, the process might want some resource to complete the execution. That is called request edge. Process is represented by a circle or oval shape. Resource is represented by a rectangle. Instance of a resource is represented by a dot. For example, if we take two processes P1 and P2 and two resources R1 and R2. Here in the first diagram, the process P1 is assigned to the resource R1, and in the second picture, the process P2 is requesting to the resource R2.
If resource allocation graph with deadlock. If there is a cycle in resource allocation graph, each resource in the cycle provides only one instance, then the process will be in deadlock. For example, P1 holds resource R1 and P2 holds resource R2, and P1 is waiting for the resource R2 and process P2 is waiting for R1. Then both the processes P1 and P2 will be in deadlock at this graph. Another example for resource allocation graph without deadlock. In here, both P1 and P2 acquiring resource R1 and R2, while P3 is waiting for both the resources R1 and R2. In this example, there is no deadlock because there is no circle dependency. So cycle is not in single instance resources is the sufficient condition for deadlock. Next, another example on multi instances without deadlock. In this graph, here we have taken multiple instances in resource R2. P1 is waiting for R2. That means it needs both the instances. But one instance P2 is holding one instance and P3 is holding one instance. But P2 is waiting for resource 1. But resource 1 instance is holded by the P1. So the deadlock will not form at this graph using multiple instances. For these multiple instances, we can use allocation matrix and request matrix also. Points to be remembered. If a graph contains no cycles, then there is no deadlock. If a graph contains a cycle, then there are two conditions. First condition, if only one instance per resource type, then there is a possibility of deadlock. If several instances per resource type, then there is also a possibility of deadlock. This resource allocation graph is only used for the single instances of the resource type. Resource allocation graph technique is used for deadlock avoidance when there is a single instance of every resource. In resource allocation graph for deadlock avoidance, we introduced a third kind of edge called claim edge, which is a dotted line from a process towards a resource, meaning that the resource can be requested by the process in future. Whenever a process requests for the resource, the claim edge is changed to the request edge, and if the request edge can be granted, then the request edge is changed to the assignment edge. After this change, look for the cycle in the graph. If there is no cycle exists, then the system is in safe state and the deadlock will not occur. Else, the system is in unsafe state and deadlock may or may not occur. Points to be remembered in the claim edge. Claim edge is represented as a dotted line from process to resource, applicable if each resource has only one instance only. Process may request resource in future. When process requests resource, change the claim edge to the request edge. Then the request edge is converted into assignment edge only if the conversion does not lead to the formation of the cycle in the graph. Example for the resource allocation graph with the deadlock. In this example, P2 is requesting for R1, but R1 holding the P1. So P1 and P2 are both requesting for resource R2. So then there is a chance of deadlock. Here, this is also an example for unsafe state in deadlock. Unsafe state means then possibility of deadlock in this graph. Suppose that process P1 requests to the resource R1. The request can be granted only if converting the request edge to the assignment edge does not result in the formation of the cycle in the resource allocation graph. Thank you.